Reprise du débat, l'honorable député de Sackville, Preston, Chiswick.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I have to say that I'm extremely pleased to stand today in support of Bill C-4. Bill C-4 removes many of the barriers that the past government, Conservative government, put in place. Barriers and administrative burdens on labour groups. I'd like to begin also by saying that unions have played a very important role in Canada for a very long time, and it's that partnership that has contributed to the success of this country and our economy. It's important also to mention that it has also improved the fundamental rights at the workplace for individuals. That's essential and should be noted. Their contribution is very large, but I'd like to state a few points that I'd like to share with the House tonight. And when we look at the unions have played a major role or contributing in establishing 8 hours a day work day, 5 days a week, which is a very important benefit for parental benefits, essential as well, health and safety, many areas where the unions have contributed with the success of those changes. Mr. Speaker, also the union, labour union has greatly contributed to the fair balance between the right of workers and the ability of employers to run efficient operation and businesses. I must say, Mr. Speaker, that in my past life, I spent 11 years as superintendent of the French School Board, and during that time, I had many opportunities to work closely with unions which are our partners, our workers, and I can assure you that it was a very successful experience and very successful negotiation, whereas the employers were able to benefit from many of the things that we negotiated, but also the school board was also able to gain from the negotiation. So it's a partnership that I'm talking about that's extremely important. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, C-377 has tipped the scale in favour of management, forcing, if you want, the public disclosure of information, which in most cases not required in the private corporations. I think, it's important to mention that this Bill C-4 is in no way intended to cut transparency. Bill C-377 is redundant legislation. If you look at the province of Nova Scotia, the Trade Union Act has provisions which allows all union members to access copies of any financial statements free of charge. The results of this transparency measures, no complaints has been filed in Nova Scotia over the last 5 years on this type of issue. I must also mention, Mr. Speaker, that the province of Nova Scotia has noticed the federal government's interference in this area, which is traditionally a provincial jurisdiction. At the May 7th, 2015 meeting of the Senate Committee on Legal and Constitutional Affairs, Nova Scotia Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, Kelly Regan, stated the following, and I quote, "Governments all across Canada are doing what they can to eliminate duplication and red tape. It's hard to understand why the federal government would enter into the area of provincial jurisdiction, and that I agree fully with the minister." And it's even more surprising that, when I hear the opposition speak of this and say that most people were in favour, let's look at it. BC, Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, PEI, and of course Nova Scotia all oppose C-377 and 525. Maintenant, permettez-moi de parler un peu de C-525. Ce gouvernement libéral est très, très fier de pouvoir défaire le dommage créé par la loi, du projet de loi C-525 du gouvernement conservateur. Cette loi force maintenant les travailleurs à trouver, qui veulent débuter un nouveau syndicat, d'avoir 40% de ses membres signés, en plus de cela, d'avoir un vote secret sur la question. Il est clair que cette mesure, cette stratégie par le gouvernement conservateur était instaurée afin d'ajouter, si vous voulez, des étapes au processus et de créer, pour créer un nouveau syndicat. Notre gouvernement croit fortement qu'il ne faut pas décourager la participation des travailleurs de la vie syndicale. C'est pourquoi nous voulons restaurer l'ancien système où les travailleurs n'auront qu'à signer 50 plus 1%. Mr. Speaker, as with so many of its initiatives, this government is working hard to collaborate with all regions of this country, with all sectors of the economy, to bring real change for all Canadians. Our government has chosen to put the trust of the country's labour organizations and its workers they represent. We must ensure that they are not treated unfairly at the negotiating table. This represents a change of tone and attitude compared to that of the previous government. It is a tone where we treat not only the union members and their workers with respect, but also the Indigenous communities, our veterans, our families, and our democratic institution. I am proud to be able to provide my full support for this bill, and I congratulate the Minister of Employment, Workforce, Development and Labour for her leadership in bringing legislation to the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Regina Van.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it was great to hear the member from Sackville speak about the collective bargaining process. And of course, a very important part of collective bargaining is the ability for employees to withdraw their labour. And that right really only has effect if the employer can't just bring in replacement workers. So several times in previous parliaments, anti-scab legislation has come forward, and often the Liberals have spoken very positively about it. But when it came down to actually voting for it, on the final reading, they sort of fell away, they didn't show up, they voted against it, that sort of thing. So, Mr. Speaker, now that the Liberals have a majority and could pass anti-scab legislation, I'm wondering if the member for Sackville could commit to do so. Thank you.
Here. L'honorable député de Sackville, Preston Chiswick-Cook.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the question by my colleague on the other side of the House, of course, but we are focused here in making the necessary changes that will allow a strong relationship between the union and the industry, the economy, so that we can ensure improvement and continued growth in this country. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Fort McMurray Cold Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I wanted to ask my colleague a question regarding their consultation with Bill C-4. He talked about, none of the consultation that happened before with 377-525. Well, we did extensive consultation. We had, many of the union members and leaders come into the committee and the Senate stage to talk about this. But does he not understand that some of the polling we did as well from Ledger and NOWS showed more than 84% of union members were in support of the legislation we put forward. So on their consultation, did you do any consultation with actual union members or just union leadership?
The honourable member for Sackville, Preston Chiswick-Cook.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very surprised to hear the member across talk about consultation. because we all know that there was very little, if any, consultation, and they tried to put it through in a private member's bill. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, we consulted with all Canadians from one part of the country to the other throughout the campaign. And it was very clear, and that's why we are the government today. We are the government today to bring change for Canadians, positive change that will allow unions and the Canadian government and the companies to work closely together to improve the economy of this country. Thank you.
Questions et commentaires? Very briefly, the honourable member for Kenora.
Speaker, just a quick question to my colleague, and I want to thank him very much for his very good speech. He spoke a little during his speech about red tape duplication. What we mean by that is the provinces already have legislation dealing with these matters in their jurisdiction. And in fact, this legislation that was put in tries to duplicate things that are already a provincial jurisdiction. Why would any government, including our own, want to proceed in a fashion like that when it's not constitutionally our jurisdiction, but it just adds more layers on something that doesn't need to be done as it is right now?
For Sackville, Preston Chisholm.
Mr. Speaker, it's been quite obvious with this past government that working with the provinces was a no-no. There was no discussion. Whenever the Prime Minister or any ministers arrived in any one of the provinces or regions, they didn't even let the people know on the government, the provincial government know that they were in town. So they didn't have any consultation whatsoever and never allowed them to expose information of that nature.
Because of the vote, we have extended